6 months after my son's wedding, the photographer called me, claiming he'd found something in the photos that would shatter everything I thought I knew about that day. I slammed the phone down and threw the glass of wine in my hand against the kitchen wall. 2 hours later, I was standing outside his studio trembling, unaware that what I was about to see would turn my dear daughter-in-law into my worst enemy. Hey there, folks. Before we dive into this intense story, let us know in the comments where you're tuning in from, and don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. It all started so well. Michael's wedding had been perfect, or at least that's what I believed. My name is Carol Davis. I'm 54, living in Austin, Texas, and up until 6 months ago, I thought I had the perfect son, married to the perfect woman. How naive I was. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon while I was tidying up the house, which suddenly felt too large and too quiet. Mrs. Davis, this is Rick Harris, your son's wedding photographer. His voice sounded strange, nervous. I need you to come to my studio tonight. It's urgent. Did something happen with the photos? I asked, even though I'd had all the official prints for months. I found something that shouldn't be there. Please don't mention anything to Michael yet. You need to see this first. My stomach clenched. Over the past 6 months, something had shifted in my relationship with Michael and Isabella. Visits had become more sporadic, conversations more strained. When I asked why, there was always an excuse: work, exhaustion, plans with her friends. But a mother knows when something isn't right, and the photographer's tone confirmed my worst fears. I arrived at the studio at 9 o'clock that night. Rick was waiting for me, visibly agitated, running his hands through his hair. Mrs. Davis, please have a seat. What I'm about to show you is going to hurt, but you need to know. He powered up his computer and opened a folder containing hundreds of wedding shots. These are the ones I didn't include in the official album. I always take extras for backup, but I review everything before deleting. His cursor stopped on a particular photo. My breath hitched. It was an image taken during the ceremony, from an angle that captured not only the altar but also the first few rows of guests. In the center, Michael and Isabella were exchanging rings, but in the far right corner of the picture, barely visible but unmistakable, was Isabella, passionately kissing another man behind a stone column. But that wasn't all. The man was Chris Miller, Michael's best friend since childhood. And the timestamp on the camera marked the exact moment Michael was saying, "I do." "There's more," Rick said, his voice cracking. The next 5 photos felt like daggers straight to my heart. The sequence was complete. Isabella quietly slipping away during the ceremony, meeting Chris, kissing him, whispering something in his ear while smiling, and then returning to her place just before the vows were finished. All this while, my son swore to love her for life. "This camera has a burst function," Rick explained. "I shot it accidentally while adjusting the zoom. When I reviewed the photos months later to free up hard drive space, I found this." I sat in silence, processing the sight. The woman I had embraced as a daughter, who I had helped plan her perfect wedding, who had received my family jewelry as a gift, she had been lying to my face for 2 years. "Why are you showing me this now?" I finally asked. "Because I debated for months whether I should, but then I remembered how kind you always were to me. You paid me extra for the last-minute work. You defended me when Isabella complained about my pricing." He cleared his throat. "And because I believe a mother has the right to know who the person who married her son truly is." I studied the photos again. In one, Chris's face was clearly visible. It wasn't a friendly goodbye peck. It was a kiss between lovers, intimate, desperate. Isabella's eyes were closed, her hand on his chest, completely lost in the moment. "Can I copy these photos?" I asked. Rick nodded and handed me a USB drive. "They're already on there. I also included a few others where you can see Isabella exchanging glances with Chris during the reception. Things I overlooked the first time. I drove home on autopilot, my mind racing a mile a minute. Suddenly, so many things started to make sense. Isabella's distant behavior after the wedding, her yoga classes, which always seemed to coincide with the days Chris was free from work, the way she avoided my eyes when we talked. But what hurt the most was something else. For 6 months, I'd been blaming myself for my son's growing distance, thinking perhaps I'd been too nosy, too protective, too much of a mother, when in reality, Isabella had been deliberately pushing me away to hide her affair. At home, I plugged the USB into my computer and studied every image. There were at least 15 compromising photos. At the reception, Isabella was dancing with Michael while looking over my son's shoulder at Chris. In another, Chris was raising his glass in a toast. But he wasn't looking at the newlyweds. He was staring directly at Isabella with a smile that was anything but fraternal. And then I saw something that made me jump out of my chair. In a photo taken during their first dance, Chris had his cell phone in his hand and it was clear he was typing a message. In another photo, barely 30 seconds later, according to the timestamp, Isabella had a secret smile on her face as she danced with Michael. They were texting each other during my son's wedding. The computer clock showed 11:43 p.m. Michael and Isabella live barely 20 minutes away. I could go right now, knock on their door, show the photos, and destroy their marriage before midnight. But something stopped me. If I was going to do this, I had to do it right. And I had to be sure this wasn't just a mistake, a moment of weakness. I needed to investigate just how deep this betrayal went. The next morning, I called my sister Rose, the only person I trusted completely. I told her everything while she made coffee in her kitchen, and her reaction was exactly what I expected. Absolute fury. "That rotten witch," Rose snarled, and coming from a woman who goes to Mass every Sunday, that meant a lot. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet, but I need more information before I blow up my son's life." Rose stared at me. "Carol, you aren't going to destroy anything. She already did." She was right, but Michael didn't know it. And knowing my son, he'd probably forgive her and try to save the marriage. I needed solid evidence that this wasn't a one-off mistake. I spent the day strategizing. Something I had noted from the photos gave me an idea. Chris worked in the same downtown office building, where Isabella claimed she took her yoga classes on Tuesdays and Thursdays. An office tower that definitely didn't house a yoga studio. The following Tuesday, I parked across the street from the building at 5 p.m. At 5:47, Isabella emerged from the elevator, alone. She walked directly toward the underground parking garage. I waited. At 5:52, Chris exited the same elevator. He headed toward the same parking lot. I followed discreetly. Chris had a black BMW that I knew well because it had been parked at my house dozens of times when he was a teenager coming over to play with Michael. Isabella got into Chris's car without even looking around. They drove to a boutique hotel on the outskirts of the city, the Grandview Hotel. They parked, they went in together. Chris was carrying a small overnight bag. I didn't need to be a detective to understand what was happening, but I did need proof. I waited in my car for 2 hours. At 8:15, they came out together, her smoothing her hair, him with that satisfied smirk I remembered from when he was a teenager who'd just gotten away with mischief. They kissed goodbye, a kiss that lasted at least 30 seconds. Then she drove off in her own car, and Isabella headed home, likely to pretend she was returning from yoga. When I got to my house, I had 3 messages from Michael on the answering machine. "Mom, Isabella just got home from yoga. She's really relaxed. She says hi." "Mom, why don't you come over for dinner tomorrow?" "Mom, I'm worried you're not answering. Call me." I called him back. "Hello, sweetheart. Sorry, I was at the grocery store." "Oh, good. Hey, do you want to come over tomorrow? Isabella is making that pot roast you love." The pot roast I loved, while she was cheating on my son twice a week at the Grandview Hotel. "Of course, sweetheart. What time?" 7. "And Mom, is everything okay? You've seemed a little distant lately." My heart squeezed. My son had noticed my behavior, but not his wife's. "Everything is perfectly fine, Michael. See you tomorrow." But everything was not perfect. And tomorrow was going to be the day I started documenting every one of Isabella's lies. Because one thing was clear. If I was going to destroy her world, I was first going to make sure she had no way to escape. Wednesday dinner was surreal. Isabella played the perfect wife. She served me food with a smile, asked about my health, even complimented my new haircut. All while, I knew exactly where she had been the day before and with whom. "Carol, I have to tell you," she said, serving dessert. "Yoga is helping me so much. I feel so much more flexible." She laughed at her own joke, and Michael smiled endearingly. Flexible. What an interesting choice of words. "What kind of yoga do you practice?" I asked in the most neutral voice I could manage. "Hatha yoga, it's very relaxing. And the instructor, Robert, is excellent. very deep in his teachings. Robert. So now Chris was named Robert in her fantasies. I'd love to check that place out, I continued. Is it close by? For the first time all night, I saw a flicker of panic in her eyes. Um, well, it's a small studio, very exclusive. They only accept a limited number of students. Michael intervened. Mom, you should try yoga too. They say it's great for circulation and stress. My son, completely oblivious, recommending the activity his wife used as an alibi to cheat on him. The irony would have made me laugh if it weren't so painful. After dinner, while Isabella was doing the dishes, Michael walked me out to the porch. Mom, can I ask you something? Sure, sweetheart. Do you like Isabella? Honestly. The question caught me off guard. Why would you ask me that? I don't know. Sometimes I feel like there's a tension between you two. Like you're evaluating her. If only he knew I was right. If only he knew I'd been evaluating her and she'd failed miserably. Michael, are you happy in your marriage? Yes, he replied immediately, but then fell silent. Well, some things have changed since the wedding. Isabella is more distant sometimes, less affectionate. But I guess that's normal, right? The first year of marriage is always tough. My heart broke. My son was suffering, and he didn't even know why. Have you talked to her about it? I've tried, but she always says she's tired from work or yoga. And Chris always tells her it's normal, that all couples go through that stage at first. Chris. Of course Chris told him that. He was probably laughing internally while consoling my son about the marital problems he was personally causing. Does Chris come over here much? Yeah, he comes for dinner about twice a week. Isabella says she feels bad for him because he broke up with Amanda last month and is going through a rough patch. Broke up with Amanda last month, exactly when her yoga classes became more frequent, based on my observation. I drove home that night with a new clarity. Not only did I have to expose Isabella, I had to expose Chris too. But more importantly, I had to protect Michael from the emotional damage that was coming, and that meant being very, very careful about how I handled this situation. In my home office, I pulled out a new notebook and began documenting everything: dates, times, specific lies. I also made a list of all the things I needed to investigate. First, how long exactly had this been going on? Because if it started before the wedding, that changed everything. It meant Isabella had walked down the aisle knowing she loved another man. Second, what other places did they frequent? The hotel was only one of their meeting spots, I was sure. And third, were there other people who knew about this and hadn't said anything? Because if I was going to destroy a lie, I was going to destroy it completely. But first, I had to be absolutely sure there was no room for error. On Thursday, I decided to follow Chris directly from his office. If they went to the hotel twice a week, I needed to confirm the pattern. I parked at a coffee shop overlooking the building where he worked and waited. At 5:30, he came out, but instead of heading to the parking lot, he walked 2 blocks to a pharmacy. I watched him buy condoms. Condoms. As if the adultery wasn't offensive enough, they were taking the precaution of using protection while betraying my son. He returned to his car and drove directly to the Grandview Hotel. Isabella was already there, waiting in the lobby as if it were the most natural thing in the world. This time, I decided to take a risk. I entered the hotel 15 minutes after them and headed to the bar, which had a partial view of the elevators. I ordered a coffee and waited. At 7:15, they came down together, but now they behaved differently, more intimate, more comfortable. Chris had his hand on Isabella's lower back. She leaned into him while they waited for the elevator. They weren't just lovers. They behaved like a couple. I watched them say goodbye in the parking lot. This time, the conversation was longer, more intense. I could read Chris's lips when he said, "I love you," before the final kiss. "I love you." I drove home with my hands shaking from rage. This wasn't just sex. It was a full-blown love affair. While my son lived in a total lie, I couldn't sleep that night. At 3 a.m., I was on my computer researching everything I could about infidelity investigations. I learned about photographic evidence, pattern documentation, and something I hadn't considered: financial records. If Chris was paying for the hotel, there would be a paper trail on his credit cards. If Isabella was spending money on special clothing, perfumes, or gifts for Chris, there would also be a trail. On Friday, I called Dolores, my cousin who works at the bank where Michael and Isabella have the joint account. I didn't tell her exactly why, but I asked her to review the account's recent activity. Carol, I can't give you specific details, but I can tell you if there's anything irregular in the spending patterns. An hour later, she called me back. There are strange expenses, Carol. Purchases at high-end lingerie stores, an expensive jewelry shop, and cash withdrawals twice a week that don't match the normal patterns. Cash withdrawals twice a week, exactly on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And Michael knows about these expenses? The cash withdrawals show up as personal expenses on the app he checks. The specific purchases only appear on the detailed statement, which is mailed to the house. My mind processed this information. Isabella was using the money from their marriage to fund her affair, and Michael had no idea because she controlled the mail and the finances. That afternoon, I did something I never thought I would. I called Amanda, Chris's ex-girlfriend. Amanda, this is Carol, Michael's mom. Hi, Carol, how are you? I haven't heard from you in a while. Amanda, can I ask you something personal? Why did you break up with Chris? A long silence. Carol, did something happen? Please trust me, it's important. Another silence. I found text messages with a married woman. Very intimate messages. My stomach dropped. Was the woman's name Isabella? Amanda's breathing hitched. Oh my God, Carol, is she Michael's wife? Yes. I am so sorry. The messages went back months, even before Michael's wedding. I didn't know how to tell you, whether I should tell you. Before the wedding, the confirmation I feared but needed. Amanda, did you save any of those messages? I took screenshots of them before confronting Chris. I have dozens. And that's when I knew I had all the evidence I needed. On Saturday, Amanda came to my house with a folder full of printed text messages between Chris and Isabella. Reading the first message, I felt the world stop. I can't wait to be completely yours after this wedding farce is over. 2 more weeks, and we can be together without hiding. The date, 5 days before Michael's wedding. The following messages were even worse. Detailed plans on how to keep seeing each other after the marriage, how Isabella would get the money for their meetings, even discussions about when the right time would be for Michael to find out. We need at least a year, Isabella had written, so he doesn't suspect this started before. Then I can file for divorce and be with you openly. They had planned everything, the wedding, the marriage, the lie. It was all part of a strategy to be together without facing the social consequences of having broken off a relationship to be with the groom's best friend. Amanda sat beside me, crying quietly. Carol, I'm so sorry. I should have told you before the wedding. Don't blame yourself, Amanda. But now I need your help. I explained my plan. I had considered several options. Confronting Isabella directly, talking to Michael first, or simply handing over all the evidence and letting him decide. But there was a fourth option that appealed to me more. What if we give them a chance to confess? I suggested. How? Michael's birthday is in 2 weeks. I'd already planned a family dinner. What if we invite Chris too? And during the dinner, I give them the opportunity to tell the truth. Amanda looked at me as if I were insane. Carol, they're never going to confess voluntarily. No, but they're going to have to act like nothing is wrong while I know everything. And when they don't confess, I'll have the perfect moral justification to expose everything. It was a risky plan, but it had an element I liked. It gave Isabella enough rope to hang herself. That night, I called Michael to confirm the birthday dinner. Sweetheart, do you want to invite Chris? It's been ages since he came to a family celebration. That's a great idea, Mom. He'll love it. He's been a little down lately about Amanda. Down about Amanda. If Michael only knew Chris had been consoling himself with his wife for months. Perfect. I'm going to invite Amanda too. Amanda. But Mom, they broke up badly. Exactly. It's time they talk things out like adults. Besides, I always liked her, and fights between friends shouldn't affect family relationships. Michael was silent, processing. Well, if you think it's a good idea, trust me, sweetheart, it's going to be a very revealing night. After hanging up, I smiled for the first time in a week. In 2 weeks, everyone would be sitting at my dining table. Michael, Isabella, Chris, Amanda, Rose, and me. The 2 culprits, the 2 main victims, a supporting witness, and the host who knew everything. I was going to throw the most interesting birthday dinner in my family's history. But first, I had one more week of preparation. Because if I was going to do this, I was going to do it perfectly. And I still had a few final surprises to organize. The week before the birthday dinner was the most stressful of my life. Not because I was nervous about the plan, but because I had to maintain the facade of normalcy while organizing the last details of my revenge. On Tuesday, I followed Isabella and Chris to the hotel one last time, but this time it wasn't to spy on them. It was to talk to the manager. "Excuse me, I'm Carol Davis," I told the man in the lobby. "I believe my daughter-in-law comes here regularly with a man who isn't my son. Would it be possible to get the records of their visits?" The manager looked at me confused. "Ma'am, we can't give out that information for privacy reasons." I took out my wallet and placed $500 on his desk. "I don't need names or details, I just need dates. The last 3 months." The man looked at the money, then at me, then at the money again. "What do you need that information for?" "For the divorce my son is going to need." 5 minutes later, I had a list of 23 dates in the last 3 months. 23 times Isabella had been at that hotel. Not all were Tuesdays and Thursdays as I had thought. There were also a few Friday afternoons, a couple of Saturday mornings, even a holiday Monday. My daughter-in-law was more active than I had imagined. On Wednesday, I did something even riskier. I went to the building where Chris worked and spoke to the concierge. "Excuse me, do you know Mr. Chris Miller from the 8th floor?" "Yes, ma'am. How can I help you?" "I'm the mother of his best friend. Have you seen Chris with a young woman recently, brunette, very pretty?" The concierge smiled. "Oh yes, Mrs. Isabella. She comes by very often. They're very affectionate." Mrs. Isabella, the concierge knew her by name. "Do you know how long he's known her? About 8 months, maybe?" At first, I thought she was his new girlfriend, but then Chris told me she was his best friend's wife and came to ask him for advice on how to surprise him. The man chuckled. "How lucky your son is to have such a dedicated wife." Advice on how to surprise him. What a creative way to describe adultery. "Do they come to the building together?" "Usually she arrives first and goes up, then he arrives about 20 minutes later, very discreet." On Thursday night, Amanda came over to help me prepare the final details. She had gathered more evidence. Chris had used his credit card to buy gifts at an expensive jewelry store, including a silver necklace with a heart-shaped pendant. The date of purchase, the day of Michael and Isabella's first monthly wedding anniversary. "Carol," Amanda said as we organized all the evidence in chronological order, "are you sure you want to do this at the birthday dinner? It's going to be devastating for Michael." I had considered that possibility for days, but I had reached a conclusion. "Amanda, my son is already being devastated. He's living a lie, spending money on a woman who doesn't love him, planning a future with someone who is already planning to leave him. The difference is he doesn't know it. But it's going to be so public, so humiliating. For them, not for him. Michael will be surrounded by people who love him and will support him. Isabella and Chris are going to be exposed in front of witnesses with no chance to manipulate the narrative." On Friday, I confirmed with all the guests. Michael was excited, especially because all the important people in his life would be together. Isabella had accepted the invitation with enthusiasm, probably because it was another opportunity to play the perfect wife. Chris had seemed slightly nervous when Michael invited him, but he couldn't refuse without raising suspicion. And Amanda was ready to back me up whatever was needed. On Saturday night, while preparing the menu for the dinner, I received a text message from Isabella. "Carol, do you need help with anything for tomorrow? I want Michael's dinner to be perfect." I replied, "Don't worry, darling. I have everything ready. It's going to be a night none of us will forget." It was the biggest truth I had told her in months. On Sunday, the day of the dinner, I arrived home early to prepare the final details. Not just the food, but the documentation. I had organized everything in a leather folder that had belonged to my late husband. Photos from the photographer, hotel records, screenshots of the messages, purchase receipts, testimony from the concierge and Amanda. It was a complete, devastating case. At 6, Rose arrived to help me with the final touches. I had told her everything during the week, and her reaction had been typical. Initial fury, followed by a detailed plan of destruction. "Do you have everything ready?" she asked while arranging the glasses on the table. "Everything. The folder is in my office. When I finish giving them the chance to confess, I'll bring it out and end this." And if Michael gets angry at you for not telling him sooner, that was my greatest fear. Rose, if my son hates me for protecting him from a woman who is betraying him, then we raised an idiot who doesn't deserve our protection. At 7 sharp, Michael arrived with Isabella. My son looked happy, relaxed, with that genuine smile I hadn't seen in months. Isabella wore a new dress, royal blue, and the silver necklace Chris had bought her, the one I immediately recognized from the receipts Amanda had screenshots of. "Mom, I love what you did with the table," Michael said, hugging me. "And thanks for inviting everyone. It's been so long since I felt this whole." My heart broke a little more. Chris arrived 15 minutes late, nervous and avoiding direct eye contact with me. Amanda had arrived just before him, and the tension between them was palpable. But the tension between Chris and Isabella was of an entirely different kind. They communicated with glances, subtle gestures, accidental touches while passing dishes. During dinner, I watched them perform their theater, Isabella being the attentive wife, serving Michael his favorite food while exchanging secret looks with Chris. Chris cracking jokes and being the loyal best friend while casually touching Isabella's hand every time she passed him something. My son, oblivious to everything, enjoying what he thought was a perfect gathering with the most important people in his life. After the main course and before dessert, I decided it was time. "Well," I said, standing up with my wine glass, "I want to make a special toast to Michael." Everyone raised their glasses. Michael has been the most wonderful son a mother could ask for. Generous, loyal, honest. I paused and looked directly at Isabella. "And you deserve to be surrounded by people who share those same values." Isabella smiled, oblivious to the double meaning. "Therefore," I continued, "before we continue the celebration, I want to give anyone who has something important to tell Michael the opportunity to do so now. Something they may have been holding back, something they think he should know." The silence at the table became thick. Chris went pale. Isabella maintained her smile, but I saw the panic in her eyes. Michael looked at me, confused. "Mom, what are you talking about?" "It's just that sometimes," I said without taking my eyes off Isabella, "people keep important secrets, and a family celebration is the perfect time to clear the air and start fresh." More silence. Chris stared at his plate. Isabella had stopped smiling. "Does anyone have anything to say?" I asked, giving them one last chance. Isabella cleared her throat. "Well, I wanted to say how grateful I am to be part of this family." "How sweet," I said. "And you, Chris? Anything you want to say to your best friend on his birthday?" Chris looked up for the first time all night. "Just that I love him very much, and I'll always be there for him." "Perfect," I said, smiling. "In that case, I'll now show you why that answer's so interesting." And I headed toward my office to retrieve the folder that would change everyone's life. I returned to the dining room with the leather folder in my hands. The silence was absolute. Everyone could feel that something important was about to happen. Michael looked at me anxiously. Rose had that look of war that I knew so well. Amanda looked nervous but determined. Chris and Isabella were rigid in their chairs. "Michael," I said, sitting down across from him, "for 6 months, I've been investigating something that was deeply unsettling me. And tonight, after giving them the chance to be honest with you, I'm going to show you what I found." "Mom, you're scaring me. What are you talking about?" I opened the folder and pulled out the first photo, the kiss during the wedding ceremony. I placed it in front of Michael without saying a word. I saw the exact moment his brain processed what he was seeing. His face went from confusion to shock, then to something I had never seen in my son, pure rage. "What? What is this?" His voice was barely a whisper. "It's a photo taken during your wedding, sweetheart. Exactly when you were saying, 'I do.'" Michael looked up at Isabella, who had turned paper white. "Can you explain this?" "Michael, it's not what it looks like." "It's not what it looks like," Rose intervened for the first time, her voice dripping venom. "A passionate kiss with my nephew's best friend during his own wedding isn't what it looks like?" Chris finally spoke. "Michael, let me explain. You have to understand." "You don't talk," Michael roared with a voice I'd never heard from him. "You don't say one word." I pulled out the next series of photos, the complete sequence of their meetings during the reception, the texts during the first dance, the secret glances. Michael reviewed them one by one. his breathing becoming shallow. This this was 6 months ago. How much longer has this been going on? I pulled out the screenshots of the text messages Amanda had saved. Since before your wedding, Michael, at least 8 months. Isabella began to cry, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of panic at being discovered. Michael read the first message aloud. I can't wait to be completely yours after this wedding farce is over. His voice cracked on the word farce. My wedding, our wedding, was a farce to you. Michael, please, I can explain everything. Explain what? Michael stood up from the table so abruptly that his chair toppled over. How are you going to explain calling our wedding a farce? How are you going to explain planning to cheat on me before we even got married? I pulled out the hotel records. 23 times in the last 3 months, Michael. The Grandview Hotel, always on the same days she told you she had yoga. Chris finally found his voice. Michael, brother, you have to understand. Brother? Michael turned on Chris with a frightening fury. You call me brother after sleeping with my wife during our marriage? Michael. Isabella stood up, trying to approach him. No. Michael held up his hand to stop her. Don't come near me. Don't touch me. Don't talk to me. There was more evidence in the folder, but I realized it was no longer necessary. Michael had seen enough. His marriage, his friendship, his trust in the two most important people in his adult life, all had been destroyed in 5 minutes. Get out of my house, he told Chris, with a calmness that was more terrifying than screaming. Right now, and I never want to see you again in my life. Chris stood up, trembling. He tried to say something else, but Michael's gaze silenced him. He walked toward the door like a defeated man. And you? Michael turned to Isabella. Tomorrow, I want all your things out of my house, and I want a divorce. Immediately. Isabella continued to cry, but now she was also pleading. Michael, please, we can go to therapy. We can fix this. Fix what? 8 months of betrayal? A wedding that was a lie? A marriage built on deceit? Michael turned to me, and for a moment I feared he was also angry at me, but in his eyes I saw something different. Gratitude. Mom, he said, his voice broken but firm. Thank you for loving me enough to show me the truth. And that's when I knew I had made the right decision. 6 months after that dinner, I'm sitting in my backyard having my morning coffee, watching Michael plant roses next to the maple tree we planted when he was a kid. My son is smiling again, and although the divorce process was painful, he emerged from it stronger and wiser. Isabella tried to fight the divorce, hiring an expensive lawyer who tried to argue that she deserved half of everything. It didn't work. The evidence we had gathered not only ensured the divorce was quick, but that Michael recovered all the money she had spent on her affair. The judge was not very sympathetic to a woman who had used marital funds to maintain an extramarital relationship. Chris lost his job 2 weeks after the dinner. It turns out that using company offices for romantic rendezvous violates several corporate policies. He also lost his apartment when the divorce payments from Michael financially ruined him. Isabella and Chris tried to be together after everything came to light. But a relationship built on betrayal rarely survives once the thrill of secrecy disappears. They broke up after 3 months of constant fighting. Michael met Penny in the divorce support group he started attending. She's a primary school teacher, also divorced, and has a laugh that fills the whole house when she comes to visit. They haven't gotten married yet, but the way they look at each other reminds me of how his father and I looked at each other when we were young. Mom, Michael approaches, his hands covered in dirt. Penny wants to know if you can teach her your prime rib recipe for her son's birthday next week. Of course, I reply, and it's true, Penny has earned the right to learn the family's secrets. I also wanted to ask you something. Michael sits in the chair next to me. How did you know? How did you know you had to investigate? It's a question he's asked me several times over the months, and I've always given him partial answers, but today I feel like he deserves the complete truth. Mothers have an instinct, I tell him. But more than that, I've known you since the day you were born. I know your real laugh and your fake laugh. I know when you're genuinely happy and when you're trying to convince yourself that you are. During those last months of your marriage, you were trying very hard to be happy. Michael nods slowly. You were right. Deep down, I knew something was wrong. But I didn't want to admit it. And that's the most important lesson from this whole experience, sweetheart. Trust your gut. If something feels wrong, it probably is. My phone buzzes with a text message. It's from Rose. Did you see the news? Isabella married some rich widower in Miami. Poor guy. I show the message to Michael, who laughs. Well, at least now she's someone else's problem. And we are free of problems that aren't ours, I add. That night, as I prepare dinner for Michael, Penny, and myself, I think about everything we've been through: the betrayal, the investigation, the confrontation, the reconstruction. It was painful, it was difficult, but it was necessary, because sometimes loving someone means being willing to be the villain in the story to save them from a lie. Sometimes it means destroying their false happiness so they can find the real thing. And sometimes, just sometimes, mothers have to be detectives, judges, and executioners to protect their sons from the people who claim to love them, but are only using them. Michael is happy now, genuinely happy, and that makes it all worth it.